All right, so I'm going to start off by just reading a brief brief intro on Sri. I'm going to read this out for those of you listening in on the podcast. So Sri Kaza, our guest, started his career at McKinsey, where he spent nearly a decade helping Fortune 500 companies rethink strategy, sales, and operations. After a time in executive roles, including at Viking Cruises, he made a big shift toward helping small businesses grow. And since then, he's led ventures like Tax Credit Co., which is now part of Experian. He founded a hiring analytics startup called Teletica and scaled Forwardline Financial as the CEO. And he guided it through a successful sale as well. And along the way, he supported tens of thousands of small businesses. And his upcoming book, Unconvention, shares what he's learned about staying true to your values while building something great. Sri, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the spectacular introduction.
Absolutely. I was looking at your website and trying to do the introduction. And by the way, I'm going to admit it's all ChatGPT, but I will take credit for taking 3 tries.
No, that's great. You picked the best of the 3 options. I got to tell you, that's an executive skill, right? The consultant skill is just to give the 3 options and then let that CEO and leader pick the one he likes the best.
Yeah, I'm staying, I'm playing a high level game here, as you can tell.
Yeah.
A little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Fahim Musa. I'm a former management consultant. I founded my own firm, Springboarders, a strategic planning consulting firm here in Toronto in 2009. I have sold and delivered over 200 consulting engagements all across the board, from large companies, small companies, nonprofits, government, etc. And I currently help independent consultants and boutique firms grow their sales pipeline and consistently add new clients. That's through my company, Consulting Leap. So let's get started with the conversation with Sri. Sri, I want to as I mentioned in the intro, you've had a lot of experience working in big consulting, and then you've helped tons of entrepreneurs, right? Tens of thousands of entrepreneurs. But I want to start off with the McKinsey experience. Why don't you give us a little bit of information on, what your experience was like at McKinsey, and more importantly, what you learned there that you still use today?
Oh, absolutely. So I had a fantastic time at the firm, and it taught me tons of how I either run my day-to-day life as an executive today, how I can be a consultant, and as well, kind of professionally, how do I develop myself and others. But it took a while for a lot of those lessons to get beaten into my thick skull. And to be honest with you, I got to McKinsey, I was mostly just ambitious and did what I was told, worked really hard, and enjoyed those very, very few moments I was patted on the back for doing well. And then, got heads back down into work and, worked on the next promotion and the next promotion. But one of the things that really, really, sunk in for me when I was there was when I was trying to go and make associate partner, I was told, hey, you've got to go pick some sort of a spike. We called it a spike at McKinsey. What is it that you're known for? And I just picked one that I thought would work. It was at the time, I think I was focused on call centers and distributed workforces, and wrote a couple of white papers and did a bunch of different studies on the topic, and it was enough to get me promoted. So I thought, okay, that's good. That's my spike. But it turned out, if that's your spike, you have to go around and say, hey, I'm known for this. I'm known for being the call center guy. And I just really didn't enjoy it. And then I shifted. I wanted to be a tech guy. I wanted to be a couple of other things. And there's nothing that really stuck with me. But then I found a lot of fun in the semiconductor industry. I spent a bunch of time with smaller firms in the semiconductors. I think at the time, McKinsey hadn't cracked into the big guys like Intel and others, but there was a number of small ones that didn't really fit on McKinsey's radar. And they were fantastic folks. I got introductions in there, was able to talk to them, and I started doing work in that space. But then I was told by pretty much everybody who's trying to help me become a partner. They all were looking to kind of help me be successful. They're always telling me these firms are too small for you, right? They're not going to do 5 studies. Like, no one's going to elect you partner if you do 10 different little clients. It doesn't work this way. And what I learned at the moment, and through that whole process was, you know what, sticking to what you actually enjoy and you're passionate about and that you believe in is probably a better route than doing the thing that you're being told to do to be successful. And I actually had taken a different mindset at the time, which was, okay, so if they're going to fire me, right? Because that happens at McKinsey after 2 years of being an associate partner and not making partner. I might as well go and spend even more time with the guys I like, because I'll probably work with them once I get fired. So I just doubled down. I just said, you know what? Fine. Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try to win work. I'm going to try to go learn a bunch of stuff about the industry, get to know, very successful leaders in that space. And worst case, yeah, I get fired and then I go work for one of them. And somehow that freedom and that mindset actually got me elected partner after all. And every one of the people who called me to congratulate and say, hey, by the way, I saw your thing, really impressive, blah, blah, blah. They told me, they used this word entrepreneurial with me. They said, oh, you're so entrepreneurial. And I think to me, what I took away was they saw it as different than the typical path. They saw it as not following some formula. But the reality was I was just, I got a spike in an industry. I developed, I did all the things that they said, but it just didn't fit what other people had seen before. So what I learned from that was, you're probably more successful if you follow the thing that you really want to do, as opposed to something that somebody's telling you you should do, but you don't believe in, or you don't really feel confident in. And that's made me both a kind of more successful entrepreneur and a more successful business leader, because I can be a lot more confident in my choices and decisions and then back them up. But it's also made me just as dangerous as many of the other entrepreneurs I've worked with, who are stubborn sometimes and really stuck in their way and trying to do something and not listening to good advice. I've seen both sides of it. So I would say that freedom, though, that freedom to commit to what I'm excited about is what I took away. It's probably one of the most powerful things to learn at that firm.
That's amazing. I really like that story because, you got into a traditional corporate consulting path, and you found yourself in about 10 years or so. And what you learn about yourself is that you're an entrepreneurial person, and you're values driven, and you simply want to do your own thing. So that's really inspiring, Sri. So thanks for that. Just before we move on, I want to request the audience, please turn on your videos. I'd love to see your lovely faces. I know a few of you have already. So please, let's make this a video on session. And I'm sure Sri would appreciate that as well. So thank you, folks. All right. So yeah, that's a very inspiring story about how you found yourself in, you understood what your values were, and then you wanted to align your values, as you move forward in your career. So let's talk about, smaller firms. Obviously, folks who are listening to this are independent consultants, or they lead boutique firms, or they want to get into consulting and so on. And McKinsey, whenever you hear the word McKinsey, I mean, depending on who you're talking to, you can have a negative connotation to McKinsey, or you have the number one consulting firm in the world, right? I admire McKinsey because because of the brand, because of all the great work that they've done. Of course, over the past few years, you've been hearing a few things not so savory, but let's leave that out of the equation and look at the brand that they built, the type of advice that they've given to some of the top executives in the world, and so on. So when a small consulting firm or small consulting firm owner or independent consultant wants to build a business, you've talked about this before. Why should they avoid copying a large firm that's already been successful? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good way to ask the question. I think just from the lesson I shared earlier, just copying something without really owning it yourself is pretty dangerous. And I think most of you guys know in your day-to-day consulting lives that when you work with a client and you bring them ideas from outside, they don't just slip right in. Like, you actually have to fit them to the business that you're working with. You have to get them tailored and bought into. You can't hand over a playbook and expect it to get executed if the people don't recognize it, don't believe in it. So when you say don't copy big firms, there's so many things that McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Accenture, all these different firms that provide consulting. There's so many things that you should look at as inspiration to how do you run your practice. But one of the things that I'll point out that I think is definitely something you got to be wary of, and I don't even know if the big firms can be successful at this, but they do this a lot, which is they try to do everything. They try to solve every problem. They try to bring solutions for everything, and they try to tell you. And sometimes they can deliver impressively, sometimes they can't. But they try to tell you that they can be the only one who can solve the problem. I think as an independent consultant, the thing that's probably most valuable is that you're unique. Now that makes it much harder to scale a business. You can't go and say, hey, look, I just do this one thing and I do it really, really well. And as I said a moment ago, you can't just take one thing and copy it over and over and over again. But what you can do is embrace some of the things that make you unique. And sometimes they'll sound like limitations. And sometimes they are limitations. But if they're focused enough to bring you a set of clients that you really particularly enjoy working with, you should be willing to say, no, that's not me. No, I don't need to go do that. I'll pick on a topic that I think you guys are going to cover in depth in the next month, AI, right? Everybody here has figured out, I think, at this point, otherwise you wouldn't actually be a consultant, like how to talk about AI when people ask you about AI, even if it may have like nothing to do with what you do. You've got an answer, and you've probably got a smart answer that says, look, this is how I use AI. This is how I would incorporate my thinking about AI in the service that I offer. You've got to do it. You've got to be able to respond. But you don't have to go rushing out there with an AI-oriented solution saying, hey, AI, sorry, AI, pay attention to me, right? That's something the big firms have to do because they've got a huge amount of overhead. They've got a brand. They've got to sound like they're thought leaders in the space that people are actively talking about. But an independent consultant should be ready to have the conversation, be someone who doesn't sound like they're trying to be at the center of attention, who's actually there to be supportive. So, I just pick on that one. If you say, hey, don't copy. Your value comes from being unique. Your value comes from the relationships that you have or that you've developed. And if you put that relationship first, like you don't go to your wife or your husband to say, hey, by the way, look, I'm like the best at AI. Like maybe you'll joke about, hey, how well you use it, but you're not going to people who care about you and know you really well to tell them that you're great at anything. Instead, you're just listening to what they're going through, sharing ideas, sharing perspectives. That makes these independent consultant firms so much more trustworthy than a brand that's out there telling you they know something.
Right. Yeah, so a lot of things to unpack there, but I'll start with this. You mentioned, obviously larger consulting firms, they do everything, right? And that's because they've got overhead, they're a larger firm, they have a bigger market footprint or whatever. But when in the early days of a consulting business, right? Like people usually get into consulting because they like doing the thing, right? They do like they're functional experts or domain experts, and they just want to be doing that. But when they start the business, or even in the early days, they quickly realize that they've got to build a sales pipeline. They've got to,
That's right. That's right.
Pay the bills, right?
Not everybody wants you as the hammer,
right?
because not everybody just has one nail, right? There are lots of
Yes.
different problems to solve. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and then what happens is, because if when they don't have a pipeline, because they don't know how to build one, most of them, they tend to take on everything, right? And whatever comes their way, whoever pays the bills, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes also, it's maybe that, as they go to market, they're trying to figure out where they fit, right? So they kind of experiment with a whole bunch of things. So that I've seen that happen a lot. So at what point, I mean, this is a two-part question. At what point do you realize and say, okay, here's something that I want to focus on? You use that word focus as well, right? Here's, what I want to be focused on, and I just don't want to do anything else. And how do you balance doing what you're doing right now and then having some kind of a vision for the future and saying, okay, here's what I'm going towards. I guess I asked like two questions
Yeah,
there, but
it's by the way, it's something that you asked at what point. And so first let me answer the harder part first, which is there is no point where you've got it. And if anybody's sitting here thinking, oh yeah, I know who I am, I'm going to be this person, I'm setting my vision, I'm going to stick with it, their business isn't going to last very long as a consultant. They have to evolve themselves. But I start with that point first, is that you don't end up finding, and I hate to use the McKinsey term, it's the one that was drilled into my brain over 10 years, the spike. I'll call it the spike. If you have a better word for it, your positioning is what I'm calling it in my book. But if you haven't found your positioning, right? If you haven't defined it, then it's really hard to do anything but take whatever shows up. So it's really important to find it. But at the same time, I think you all have, those of you who've been at this for a bit have experienced that you're still searching for it. And you find that, yes, every so often, or every wave of change, or any economic crisis, or any loss of a big client, you're rethinking that. So my advice would be to embrace that evolution happens all the time. Call out and carve out time in your management of your business, of your practice, to think about what that is for the next 6 months to 18 months, almost every 6 months. And you want to be more pragmatic then about what you're doing today. You have a pipeline today that hey, I've been talking to these people, the conversations that I've got, and this is what's kind of coming about. When I was at McKinsey, we had this kind of rule of 16. You'd have like 16 kind of somewhat conversations happening, 8 discussions on possible real projects, maybe 4 proposals you're working on, 2 that you actually pitched and working today, and then 1 that's an ongoing that you're doing. So some sort of like funnel, right? Now, not everybody's got the same funnel model, et cetera. But I would suggest that you have that today, and every 6 months you evaluate, all right, what's common about them? What do I love? What do I not love? Which of these 16 conversations do I want to have more of? And which of these 16, because of those 16 conversations, there are a handful that you want less of. Be honest with yourself about what you want less of. And say, all right, I'm having them. They might lead to revenue, so I'm not going to stop them, right? But how do I proactively gear myself to be the person who's having more of these 7 or 8 that I like? And hopefully with some experience, you also get the sense of, okay, fun conversations that also land in revenue, right? Because you can't, there's a lot of us, especially when you start on early, you don't know what's going to turn into revenue. So you have to have all of them. And if you gear towards the fun ones that don't turn into revenue, and you end up with ones that you don't like that do turn into revenue, that ends up in this kind of cycle that you don't like. So you got to develop your own experience in terms of the work that you're doing, what's going to turn to revenue, and what you really enjoy. But
right.
Every 6 months you come back and you say, look, I'm going to pick on a friend of mine, who I talked to a bunch, who, when he first started, he was the product manager guy. And I was like, that's really kind of broad. Like, you're really going to get a whole bunch of work, because there's a whole bunch of product managers who they could just hire. And then he said, well, I do SaaS mostly, so I'm going to be the SaaS product manager guy. And then he's like, well, I'm going to be the B2B SaaS product manager guy. And as he started to feel like he got lots of conversations that he liked that were really about product management techniques, he learned that the ones that came to revenue more often were the pricing ones. So guess what? He became the B2B SaaS pricing guy, not the product management guy. But he liked it. He enjoyed it. And now he's thinking, you know what, though? I get enough of that. I do want to go do more of the pioneering. So he's readapting and adjusting again. And as you think about being an expert, right? Like, the AI thing is a good example of something. It's a big earthquake to everybody. So somehow now you're going to have to incorporate AI and what you're doing about it, and what you're doing about technology in your day-to-day conversations. And it could be part of your positioning. And in these, again, it doesn't have to be every 6 months, but in these repositioning points in time, when you're thinking about who you want to be, what your positioning should be, again, looking at your pipeline, looking at the conversations that you love, you incorporate, maybe I do want to be more AI. You don't have to chase it, though. You have to be thoughtful and strategic about it, just like you would say to your clients.
Got it. Yeah. It's interesting that the rule of 6 months, reevaluate every 6 months. I think that's pretty practical, especially in our world, which is so dynamic and it's changing in so many different ways. I want to stay with positioning a little bit more, Sri, because I know that you write about this in your book, Unconvention. It's one of those 3 pillars, and we'll get to the others soon. But I struggled with this. I know a lot of consultants who struggle with this. Let's just take a few steps back, and I want to hear your definition of what positioning really means. And then, we'll talk about, how practically consultants can find their position. I think you've mentioned a few points, like ask yourself, what do I like? What do I not like? What kind of engagements? And so on and so forth. But let's just break that down a little bit, because I think that could be one of the big takeaways for people in the audience. So how do you define positioning, and then how do you find that position for yourself in the market?
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me all right? Is my audio okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. I just saw a little flash up saying the audio was struggling. So just wave your hand at me if the audio struggles. My explanation of positioning, at least in the book, is really for any kind of business, not just the independent firm. And one of my favorite analogies to just describe positioning is the parking lot attendants, nearby a stadium, the guy who's got the $10 lot, not the $30 lot in the stadium. He's locked in on his position. He knows exactly who he is. He's not the easy, convenient. He's the cheap. But he's not the totally cheap, because there are free parking 2 blocks away. But he knows who's around him. He knows what customers are going to go after. So as a small business, you have to acknowledge and accept and embrace a position. It doesn't mean that you have to say, hey, I'm going to live with where I'm at. You can move, you can adjust, but you should be very, very much aware of it and then embrace it. When it gets down to a business that's got much more closeness to its customers, your position is very, very much in tune with what your customers want, specifically the customers that love you, the customers that come back to you, the customers that you love working with or want to serve the most. An element of why I wrote that book was about how a lot of the businesses that I saw survive COVID saw the customers that valued them the most rally to save them when there were challenges. These customers saw these businesses as important in their lives, beyond just the transactions, beyond just going and getting a meal that was nice. They wanted that business to be around in the future. So I got to imagine a ton of you guys found yourselves going out saying, hey, that restaurant that I like to sit down at, they're shut, but they have takeout. Like, do I really want to eat that food out of a styrofoam box? I don't think it matters. I'm going to order it anyway because I want to support them. Or, yeah, I've got this gym that I go to, or a personal trainer that I work with that I don't really need that person if I can't see them in person, but I'll do the Zoom. I'll support them. I'll support that individual. That doesn't come from being just a good provider of a service. It comes from having something unique. It comes from being a little bit more essential in the lives of the customers. And so as you think about your positioning and you think about kind of how you're bringing yourself to market, it has to be unique and it has to be valued. It doesn't have to have the widest market. In fact, the more narrow, the safer. Being narrow just means maybe you don't have enough revenue. So you've got to balance it as an independent consultant or independent firm or small firm, what space you're in. But a simple way to put it for the business types here is, find a good niche and stay and make sure you've got it defined well. Right.
Yeah, I like the example you gave, the analogy of the parking lots. It's so clear, like especially because as a parking lot, it's fixed real estate, right? So
exactly.
It's there's no ambiguity there. You're not close to the stadium, so you can't be the $30 guy. You got to be the $10 guy. So it's a nice way to look at it that way. The other thing which I found really interesting was that you mentioned that during COVID, some of the people or businesses that you knew, customers rallied around them to save the business. because they just wanted them to be around, right? That's so important, right? Because it's not just about positioning yourself around customers you like working with or types of businesses you like working with. I mean, you got to also figure out who are the customers who absolutely love you and they want you to be around. And if there aren't any customers like that, then either there's something off about how you're going to market, and that's like that kind of exposes the weaknesses in your business, and you can work towards that. But I just find that interesting. But you
Yeah.
mentioned a couple of interesting words as you were talking. You talked about unique. You talked about, being valued. You talked about being different. Now, again, like these are words that, people I hear a lot, and a lot of people talk about their uniqueness. Everyone says that they're very unique, and so on and so forth. But can you talk a little bit about that? About, how do you um, kind of understand what makes you unique as a small business or a small consultant or independent consultant, and then how do you kind of articulate and communicate that so that people perceive you, your market perceives you as different?
Yeah, this is great. I want to give you another really terrible analogy, but you'll like it anyway. I think I'm going to give you, it's out of my book too. I'm going to give you a simple analogy of two trash dumps, landfills, right? Kind of the most unsexy analogy you can think of. I did when I was McKinsey did pricing work, and one of the projects I had to do is go work at a landfill and figure out how to price their service. Can anybody imagine how a landfill is actually unique? I mean, it's just not. It's a big
I'm
hole
happy you
in the
didn't make that
ground,
your spike.
right? But it turns out there are things that a certain landfill offers that other landfills cannot possibly offer. Like one of them is distance. It costs a ton of dollars to drive a garbage truck from the city to a location. You got to pay the driver, you got to pay for gas. And so if you're charging X dollars a ton and the guy who's further away is charging the same amount, you just take your price up because you're worth more. So I use this analogy, simple. Many of you probably seen it in a pricing class or some kind of economics class of you've got distance, and if you factor the distance into your calculation, you can charge for price. Why does that have anything to do with why you're unique? Why you're unique is, Femi, you may be the only person in Toronto who does what you do. There's people in LA, there's people in New York, but you're in Toronto. All of a sudden, the uniqueness doesn't have to be just your skill. It could be where on the block you're located. It could be the type of person you are. It could be the type of communities that you're part of. It doesn't have to be specifically what's in your brain. You know, because you've been, doing it for a long time, that you're selling what's in your brain. But your relationships, the people you know, the network, even your geography are actually of value and define your uniqueness, especially when you're small. Like if you're trying to be a McKinsey, then you've got to have a location everywhere. You've got to be in every place where there's a big company. You've got to do so much more. And you have to be unique in different ways. But even as an independent consultant, knowing that you've got a certain range and committing to it. You don't, again, like if you want to be a local in-town consultant who does tons of face-to-face, then you're only focused on Toronto clients, fine. But if what you say is, look, I do face-to-face, I do that because I focus mostly on Toronto. You get this fantastic opportunity to go do work in New York. And I know you'll make the adjustments. You'll do the work in New York. You probably do more of it remote than flying out. But the point would be that you are unique in that to the customers that value you and the customers that you bring your service to, you're the only one out there that does that because you've picked your place on the block.
Right, got it. So, it reminds me, your story reminds me of something that I tell my clients often is about, um, where you value is determined by the buyer, right? Like, and it depends on, the location. Location is one of them. I give this example of, a bottle of water. You go to a convenience store, it's priced at $1. That same bottle of water, if you're buying it at an airport, it's probably like, $4, right? It's the same thing. But where you uh, where people buy it it differs. So that's the it reminded me
That's
of
right.
what you said.
That's right. That bottle at the airport is unique.
Yes. And it's also how you serve, right? Like it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be about the functional benefit of the service. It's also about how you serve and how you show up. In consulting, I also find that because it's a people to people business, your personality also is part of your uniqueness, because beyond the functional benefit of having you as an advisor and a consultant, clients know that they're going to be working with you for a long time. It's not like they're buying a piece of software and then never see an individual. This is professional service. So how you show up, how you speak, et cetera, it becomes super important. And that's why I tell all my clients and my constituents that, look, when you go out and try and build a pipeline, you want to ensure that you use advantages like video, for example. I know I'm getting a little tactical here, but the more people see you on video, the more they'll get to know you, they'll get to understand how you show up, how you speak, et cetera, and that builds affinity, right? So, and then plus, because a lot of people don't even do video, and because they're afraid of it or whatever, and that can kind of differentiate you and build a different type of uniqueness, which is not necessarily related to your work, right?
That's right.
So
That's right.
cool. So talk to us about other principles in the book on Unconvention and what you've seen along the way. I know you've helped tens of thousands of businesses, and you might have seen so many different types of situations, examples, and I love the examples that you're sharing here today. But talk to us about some of the other principles that small businesses and especially smaller consulting firms can use to build that values base, to build a business that aligns with their values and their and the way they want to show up in the world. And by the way, just before you respond to that, Sri, to the folks in the live audience, I just want to say that feel free to think of a few questions if you have any. I mean, I want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have a question about your situation, or you're just curious about something Sri said, just use that little hand icon. I think it's somewhere in Zoom, or you can just raise your hand. I'll have you jump in, or we could wait till the end. And you can ask a question, but please feel free to jump in and ask a question. But anyway, so Sri, back to what I was asking you. What are the other things or ideas that you've seen that small consultants and small businesses in general should be aware of as they grow their business that aligns with their values?
Great. So I think I had three principles. We talked about positioning. One of them was proximity, and one of them was purpose. And what I kind of lay out in some of my analysis is that every business is going to be subject to the same rules of business, same gravity, right? And gravity doesn't change. Business rules really don't change. The strategies and the frameworks, they're the same. But these three principles allow the smaller business to navigate in a very different way some of these same sets of rules. We talked about positioning. In many ways, you say any niche business can navigate the same way. But when we talk about purpose, for example, and you talked about impact and meaning too, an independent owner of a business isn't just in it to grow and be profitable. I don't want to say that they're not trying to grow and be profitable. That's absolutely an objective of a business. But it may not be the only one. It may not be the most important one. It could just be that someone wants independence, doesn't like having a boss, or likes being their own boss. It could be that they're trying to build something for their friend, their family. They could be doing any number of things, or they just may believe in a certain topic that they really want to evangelize. But understanding your purpose and again, just like in the same 6-month process of figuring out what your positioning is, knowing that purpose, again, just reminding yourself of, why am I doing this? gives you now one more lever to develop deeper relationships and stickiness with your customers. Maybe in the case of an independent consultant, you have a few clients that you come back to often, right? And you work with regularly. For them to know you and know what your purpose is for them to have a deeper relationship with you and deeper trust. I imagine most of you have heard of this book, The Trusted Advisor. I cite
Yeah,
his
it was
the
David
trust
Meister, right?
equation. Yeah, and I love the book, love the trust equation. But a big piece of the trust equation is intimacy. It's something that consultants often need to go remind themselves of. For me, I always have to remind myself of it. Is that your audience, your client is going to trust you only if they know you, if they feel like they know you. So when I come back to purpose and I talk about how purpose is valuable, um, when I saw some examples of people rallying to the bookstores and like running GoFundMe campaigns during COVID to get bookstores to stay up, they believed in the purpose of the bookstore. They knew the bookstore wouldn't last. They were just throwing money at it to stay alive. They believed in that purpose, and the purpose is shared and was pretty powerful. Now, as an individual consultant, you may not have this. I'm trying to save the world, or I'm trying to, deploy green technology, or whatever it is that people will align with your, general purpose. But if they know your purpose, they know why you're in it, they know more about you. That's actually quite productive anyway. It deepens your relationships and it allows you to be yourself. And then when you can actually be yourself and like fit your purpose, you're just a better consultant. You're a better
Right,
advisor.
right. So let's just dig in a little bit about this purpose idea. Now, when you say your business needs a purpose because people will trust you and so on, they'll know you and they'll trust you and so on. Does a small business, when you say purpose, does it have to be related to the business? Like, you're gonna have a purpose where you're changing a market, you want to change a market or
No,
whatever, like
I don't
you
want
see
to
a
put any
problem,
constraints on
right?
it. No, no, I
Or
don't want
does
to
it
put
have
any.
to be like a social purpose, like something that is, broader than that? Like, could you elaborate on that? Like, maybe you
Yeah,
can give us some
sure.
examples of some
So, so,
businesses where you've seen powerful purposes.
yeah, look, the suggestion that you need a purpose is much more personal and internal than
Hmm.
to be marketed. Some purposes are very marketable. So, like the example I was talking about, there's a bookstore I profiled where they were focused on helping people with severe autism kind of get into the workplace. So that purpose mattered to them, and there's a number of people in the community that wanted to support that, and people see that as kind of giving back to the community, and so that's a great purpose, and you align your customers who have that same purpose. But I'm not suggesting that at all about one individual consulting practice or any one individual business. I think it's much more an internal piece first. When a large company tries to get their people aligned, they have a handful of goals like shareholder value or revenue growth or new customer acquisition. There's some metric, very objective metric, and you need that to get seven people in a room working on something to end up with an answer they all agree with. Small businesses, often owner run, um, they don't need that. They don't explicitly talk about it. And sometimes they even in their own mind will get confused. Is it about revenue? Is it about growth? Is it about making sure I have the next client? Or is it about making sure that I feel like I'm doing the thing that I actually started this whole business for, which might be to be my own independent boss, to be a person who's created more time for my family, to whatever that might be, right? If you lose sight of that purpose, you'll run a business that doesn't deliver for you, right? You won't be happy with your business. So the first principle is just come to terms with what your purpose is. Make sure you think about it. It may have changed or evolved since you started your practice. Um, and then once you've embraced it yourself, share it. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. You should be able to tell at least some of your favorite clients. By the way, the reason I do this is I don't like having a boss, right? If that's all it is, you say it. Be open about it. Embrace it. Embrace your purpose, and you'll get a little bit better in terms of matching your uniqueness to a market that believes in you. and you know better than I do what your once you know your purpose, how your market will react to it. Look, if your purpose is I just want to make tons and tons of money, don't care about what happens to anybody else, that's a purpose. That's fine. I don't know that you'd share that purpose broadly, but that's a purpose, and then you can be committed to it. So, without overstating it, being explicit first with yourself about purpose is important. And in the consulting world where trust matters, knowing that purpose and being open and sharing it is actually productive.
Right. Yeah, I like that because you know, you just talked about uniqueness, right? Like it doesn't uniqueness. You talked about an example about location and where you are. Um, your purpose also, your purpose in a big way helps to kind of communicate your uniqueness because in all likelihood your purpose is going to be personal. If you're going to start with something personal, your purpose is going to be something unique, and when you share it, that's another way to kind of communicate how different you are, and that hopefully will lead to more affinity and lead to more trust, right? Can you give me an example? I mean, I know you've worked with tens of thousands of businesses. I don't want to, lose that opportunity. Can you give me an example of some, unique small businesses with, purposes that, you've never forgotten that it just stayed with you, right? Like
All right, I'll pick one
uh,
that didn't stick in my book because I had no way to figure out how to fit it into my overall framework, but it stuck with me forever. So when I was young, coming out of college, I went to work for Pricewaterhouse as a consultant, and then eventually left to go be part of the dot-com revolution in Silicon Valley. But being young and not very limited in what I knew I could do, I just thought I could do anything. I took a job with my startup to lead sales in Asia. I didn't speak Japanese at the time, but I, got on a plane, got a book to learn Japanese, and moved to Tokyo. And I'm here now. One of the things that I remember really, really vividly was one of the weekends I'm looking for a place to eat, and I see this cute little tiny uh, wooden facade part of a building where during the work week there's a long line outside, and I saw there's no line, so I was like, oh, let me go in. And I get to the front, and there's this vending machine with one, two, three, five, maybe six buttons, and all with just Japanese characters. And of
mhm.
course, I'm intimidated. I can't figure it out. I'm like, what am I going to do? I look inside. There's literally seats for like four people, maybe six people. And three or four of them are taken, and I'm scared. I don't go. I go talk to my friend later, and I find out that, oh yeah, no, that's there because they don't have anybody else working. It's just the guy making the ramen, or in that case, it might have been soba, but just the guy making the soup, and he doesn't deal with money. So you take your cash, you put it in the vending machine, you get a ticket, you give him the ticket, he makes the soup, he gives it to you. And I went, tried the soba, it was good. Um, Figured out how to like make my decisions of what I'm going to order. And I realized that his whole purpose was making the best soup possible. It's a term in Japan, I think it's called a shokunin, this mastery. He could care less about his customers. He could care less about the cash. He just wants to make that fantastic ramen. And it stuck with me in that, and that's a very common thing in that country to see individual solo practitioners loving their craft
Mhm.
and then paying for and building and making all these other random things so they don't have to do anything other than the thing that they love.
Right.
It stuck with me, and it's a common theme. I always have this picture of this vending machine in my head. It's big mechanical, big buttons. It's just there so that the guy who wants to make soup makes soup. The guy who wants to make noodles just makes noodles. So when I embrace it and bring it back into like, businesses that I work with and businesses I've seen be successful, people who love what they do tend to be more successful than the ones who don't. Um, People who love what they do and then make time to do that and find ways to get the other stuff away to other people, they're even more successful. Right?
Right.
So that image sticks with me all the time and saying, okay, well, where do I buy my big mechanical vending machine for this one part of what I'm trying to accomplish that I don't like? Right? which by the way, I think we all know ChatGPT is that guy for all of us. It's the new Japanese vending machine in my head. But there's so many things you could do that you don't have time for that you may not enjoy now. You can find something else. But like anybody who's running a business, go embrace the stuff that you love, right? If it's dealing with your customers, great, have more conversations. If it's doing the analytics or doing the mechanical thing to take care of the rest of it, or hire somebody to take care of the rest of it.
Right, right. I think I lost you for a couple of seconds. I don't know if it's me or you, but yeah, I'm glad you're back. Yeah, that's a consultant's dream, right? Like just doing what they want to do and working on their expertise and skill and just outsourcing or eliminating the rest, right? But I think that's a topic for another day when we talk about operations and so on. So, but yeah, that's I mean, it's super interesting about the fact that purpose is personal. It starts from you and then it adds to your uniqueness. I want to open it up to questions. I have a couple more questions of my own, but I want to open up to any of you in the audience who has a question for Sri based on your current problem that you're facing, or based on whatever Sri has been talking about today. So either raise your hand, your physical hand, or you can press that little hand icon and you can unmute, or you could even type in your question in the chat. So feel free. Okay, so as people are thinking about their question, let's talk about the other big idea that you mentioned, Sri, which is proximity, right? So talk to us a little bit about what proximity is and then how that shows up in a small business.
So in simple terms, proximity is your closeness to your customers. And in any small business, by nature of it being small, the person at the top, the CEO, the decision maker, is closer to his customers than any kind of big company, right? I don't know if it's still Bob, but the managing director does not know all the clients, right? But he meets a bunch of the most important ones, but he does not all the clients, right? So knowing your customer and being the decision maker is quite an advantage compared to any other business. And the reason I think that matters, and the way we see it matter in the study of the small businesses that we'd done work with when I was at Forwardline, is it matters because they can make quick decisions that fit to their customers that bigger companies are just unable to do, and creates more of this trust and safety between the two. Again, going back to some COVID examples, there were businesses in Texas and Florida that really struggled with their customer growth and revenue, despite Texas and Florida having very open rules for what you could wear or put a mask on, etc. While in California, we saw some stable business behavior. People didn't have the same struggles. And when I was digging into why I saw different performance across different businesses in specifically like nail salons where you had some space requirements, et cetera, in California, they were full. They were limited to a certain amount of space, but they were full. In Florida, they weren't. And in talking with one of the salon owners, she said, we figured it out quickly. We put together a plan for ourselves because our customers actually wanted to feel protected. So we said we had all these things, even though they weren't required, even though we were told by government, hey, you don't need to have masks, you don't need to have this distancing. We put in some. They weren't nearly as draconian as the ones we saw in California, but she put in some to get the customers who were hesitant to want to come back in. She understood why they weren't coming in because she talked to them. She knew them. From her community, people were worried about the virus. And the state wasn't as worried as she was, or her community, but she knew her community really well. She was able to implement rules right away. National chains for lots of different things, they couldn't do that. They were either draconian, right? And so they kind of screwed up in the communities that they were in where people weren't worried about it, or they were loose and they didn't give assurances to people who were worried about catching something. But proximity means you know your customer really well and use your position as a decision maker to make decisions quickly and fit their needs.
Right. And for professional services, especially consulting, it's a real advantage for folks like us because we're working with the client on a daily basis while the engagement is on. And you're talking about business problems, you're speaking about their goals, their fears, et cetera, et cetera. And so that way you can get a lot of insights about what they're going through. And if they're going through it, then there's a good chance that a lot of other people also are going through it. And so you can get a sense of the market. And as you speak with more and more of your customers, your clients, you can really create something unique for yourself in terms of your value proposition and even with respect to messaging. So I think that's an advantage we have, right? And especially if you have a very highly trusted relationship, then your clients are going to open up to you, and that is a goldmine of information, right? So I think we have a question from Rajvi. Rajvi, if you don't mind, can you please unmute?
Hi.
And
Hi, thank you so much, Fahim and Shri, for this conversation today. It's really
sure.
insightful. So I wanted to ask, so I work as an independent consultant. I I studied from London. I came back to India. I live in my hometown. I do get clients here when when I'm going and talking and meeting them at startup events, when I talk to them in person. So when she was talking about proximity, that actually works. So when I'm in person, when I can understand their business and can tell them how, as a consultant, I would be able to actually help them out. But also the thing is that not every time people are actually open to advice or want to pay someone as a consultant in the city. That is something that I found out from senior consultant also who have been working in the city. So
Mhm.
how do I expand my reach to other cities or other places as well? Uh, like with whatever I have, like how do I place myself like to be more to a bigger audience?
Good question. Look, you're in a tough day and age to try to present yourself virtually kind of anywhere. One of the reasons is AI can do almost anything you can do and probably better when it comes to email, outreach, etc. What you're struggling with at the moment is convincing people of the value that you can bring to them.
Yeah.
You're not struggling with finding people to talk to who you can develop a trusted relationship with. So I don't want to tell you to go and focus on your own backyard, right? But my sense is you'll have a better shot of working on your value first. Finding people who will trust you with something isn't easy. And I know a lot of folks here are out there trying to go and convince somebody that, yes, I'm smart. Yes, I can solve your problems, but I'm not going to do it until you pay me. Right? And there's such a road in consulting. I speak only from my personal experience. I imagine folks have had similar though, is you got to spend a lot of time helping people think about the problem before they believe that you can solve it for them. And they're on a very different mind journey, which is, maybe this guy's gonna give me all of my answers and I don't have to pay him. So that, Raji, is probably the problem I would guide you to think about. You're gonna find
Yeah.
people, you're gonna meet people, you're gonna make connections.
Okay.
You're not gonna know what problems they want you to solve or how to pitch to them until you talk more, until you
Yeah.
go develop a deeper relationship and have more conversations. Keep that door open. But at some point, you're going to have to make a decision on, okay, look, here, I can do this. I'm confident I can solve your problem. But you've got to pay me. Just imagine not using a face-to-face conversation to convince somebody of that and instead using emails. That's going to be so much harder to use emails.
Harder. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. The more conversations you have, the more insights you get about your
Yeah.
market. So thanks for the question. We're
Thank you so
approaching
much.
yeah, you're most welcome. We're approaching the top of the hour, so we'll just do one quick question. Babalo, if I can have you unmute and please ask the question quickly so we can wrap up. Thank you so much.
Okay, cool. Hello everyone. So I think mine quickly is just so I've had situations where I have basically been environments where the opportunities there, I was seeing them coming in as a solo individual and, struggling with the ability to convert and sort of scale within the client. And, I've tried in some instances to sort of put in some hours free to sort of, I don't know, sort of as a bargaining tool to say, look, I can actually do this. But all of those instances where I've tried those different tactics, ended up as being unsuccessful at the end. And that has been sort of the struggles, identifying the opportunities and getting in there, sort of getting that right. But when you are inside now, right, to sort of convert those engagement into longer term engagements and also try to also grow the account as well.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think if you're looking for advice on this, it'll be tough for me to give you something kind of out of the box, given I don't know the specifics that you're working on. But I've found almost in every case, because I do this too, I try and give away a little bit so that people know, here's a flavor of what I can do, and you can get burned regularly by doing that, and it cheapens your value. It says, hey, look, this is easy to do. I can do it. You don't need to pay me for it. So you got to be careful of how much free advice you're going to give. But in the end, I think the bigger challenge for you will be, how do you help your client recognize the value of the opportunity and what they may be losing out if they don't hire you? Right? You're now inside. Getting inside is for you, not for them. When you're inside and you're learning things, you're building a business case to sell your services. You're saying, hey, let me go get data that says, how big is this? Let me go get data that says, what is their path today if they don't hire me versus what's their path going to be if they hire me? Let me be bold about the impact that I can have and show them that, look, this is what I've learned. Here's your data. Here's what your people say. Here's what I've picked up by you allowing me on the inside, and use it to build a case for why to hire you. That free work isn't just for them. It's for you. Get your side of that value too.
Right. Just try before you buy. Show them the value, and then convert that way. So thanks for the question, Bhavalo. And Sri, just before we wrap up, if people want to find you, where do they go?
Well, I've got a website. It's sri-kaza.com, sri-kaza.com. And I've got a Substack that I'm kind of trying out my voice on. It's you have to forgive me. I had an editor when I wrote my book, and she was fantastic, and so she helped me write really, really well. But she is not editing my Substack, so that's just me running my mouth. So, but read it. It's interesting stuff. It's mostly just things that I like to write about that I see in the media and think are interesting to talk about.
Well, you running your mouth is definitely going to make you unique, Sri, because you speak straight from the heart. You got a lot of experience, and I'm going to go and subscribe to your Substack. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I'm really grateful that you've spent some time here and sharing your insights with all of us. So thank you, Sri.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Right. And one last thing for those of you who wanna listen to the replay and also join the community, I've shared the link in the chat. It's Consulting Growth Hub. Go ahead and join, and you'll meet a lot of other consultants there as well. So thank you, folks, and I'll see you at the next session.